Hi, welcome to Dale's 50-cent tour of retrospective social sciences and psychology places that you can possibly look. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you some ideas for brainstorming, but also give you some of the experiences that I've had. I've looked up a couple of these topics and I was just like, I'm not sure if I'm going at it the right way. So part of this will be a partnership where you and I negotiate and sort out what's the best place to go. So here's our population, here's our diagnosis, and here's a date range. And we're looking for scholarly voices in this period of time. Back in the day, books were a big deal because journals weren't as easy to disseminate as they are today. Like the internet makes like publishing like super easy. So we'll take a quick peek into books. If you wanted to find the voices of people being mentioned in newspapers, I'll show you just briefly how to look up things like that. Because if somebody was mentioning it in New York Times, they might drop the names of an author that you could go back in and look. And then lastly, the original question, I'll get around to the question you originally asked me is like, well, what databases do I look in? And I'll describe the value and paradigm lens of each one of these. Okay, so library catalog. When you go to advanced catalog search, you can select books specifically. There's some articles, but I think they're duplicated in databases, so I wouldn't rely on this for articles. But, excuse me, you can just do books, and then you can do publication date, a date range, or maybe just a specific. I thought you could do a date range. Oh yeah, there we go. So 1958, 1964, and I don't know if that's going to cover all of 1958. I hope it does. So one issue that we start out with is the atavistic terms for people of African American ancestry. So they didn't use African American back then, but just for sake of argument, African American or black, or, and this is a very atavistic term, the word of the day, atavistic, it's something that's like way out of time and something that should stay back in time. But it might be a valuable thing to go into. And what we can do is go into, I suppose, any field. But then when you're, I would say, so one thing that I had a tough time finding was schizophrenia. Sometimes it was called schizoid or schizophrenia. But let's just look in psychology. Because if anything, if a book is described with any of these terms, that's like the main point. It's not doing any full text searching at all. So if it's like the psychology of African Americans, so we can see if there was any books published at that time. Drum roll. Oh, there's 12. What's manifest anxiety? So there's dermatology, how to mentor people. So this might be something that would work really well. Since we have psychology as part of it, we can assume that at least a chapter is about this. As you go through these, excuse me, go through them quickly. And so if you like see something, you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. Or no, that's has nothing to do with it whatsoever. But they might be doing a larger thematic study of a particular population rather than just like a focused chapter, because it's a book. Okay. So, but as you go, know that you can go back and forth between these. So as you come up with an idea, maybe going back and forth between, find a different description or a different author, it might be useful to go back into there. Okay, moving on. Newspapers, historic. I'm not going to go in and search for those, but I just wanted to touch on that it might be a worthwhile place to go. How you find the historic newspapers, depending on where you want to look at, You go to the databases and newspapers, and there's a couple of resources that you should be aware of. So there's African American newspapers, but a lot of those are also named. It's Atlanta Daily World, Chicago Defender. These are historically for African American audiences, and editorial and yada yada yada. But you can also see there's some big papers like oh, there's an integration. U.S. So LA Times, that goes back to 1881. There's a New York Times Historic that goes back to 1851. These would be a great place to look because they're speaking for that national zeitgeist. Maybe leaning left, maybe leaning right. This is what you get to determine. But there's a few papers in here. Here we go. Pittsburgh Courier, Baltimore Afro-American, Washington Post. So there's a lot of these, and you can just see the date range right here. Okay, moving on. The first database that I wanted to show you is JSTOR. Back when the internet started in the mid-90s and people started freaking out like librarians went and they said, well, what are the most important journals? What are the highest regarded journals, the ones with the highest impact in every field? Let's digitize the backlog of those and post it online. So this was an early archival database of all the good stuff. So this isn't going to have, I'll call them lesser journals, lesser impact. These are the high impact ones. When you go to advanced search, excuse me, I may be suffering from springtime. Since this is all the disciplines, and by the way, the interface is clunky. So if you do a search and then you're like, oh, I want to modify it, and you hit the back button, it'll erase your search. So maybe do mindfulness meditation before you search in this one, because I was just like, ah. So if you can go in publication date, 1958 to 1964, and you can go to specific disciplines. So what librarians did, I guess almost 20 years ago, no, it was 20 years ago, is they narrowed it down to like what are the best journals in each discipline. So if you click on psychology, and you look for something in the item title, in psychology, black or, I don't know, maybe I'll just do African, because they would say African ancestry, or that atavism again. So I'm looking, so I haven't done schizophrenia yet. So I did a search before for schizophrenia and schizoid and I found nothing. But if we're talking about a particular defined population, that's a big thing in psychology, is saying this is the population, this is how they self-identify, this is genetic traits and blah, 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 blah. This might inform what we're looking for. And it's more objective as we get closer to our time. But I'm only looking in psychology, and I'm only looking in the title, and it's only the top psychology journals. There's only 8 results. Is this what we're looking for? Career. There's all sorts of different things going on in here that might help. But I looked up schizoid, schizophrenia, and there was nothing. But for what it's worth, these are all, oh cool, there's a German one. All of these are full text in JSTOR. I don't know if you can hear the fan on my computer. It's like, video. This doesn't have a great citation generator, but the text is beautiful. It's like the original scan. Which they preserve. So it's not HTML text. You get that original formatting. So for what it's worth, go through and you can see names of authors. You can go back to the metadata right up here. Here's the citation. And as you gather information, this might help inform your search. Next one. I wish it was Zoom where it could like cancel out my cough. Have you noticed that in Zoom? Next one. Humanities and Social Sciences Retrospective. I just go to the title and look up retro. So JSTOR is the greatest hits. It's the best. This index is the rest. I found some terrible things in here that did not pass muster for quality, or not, shoot, what's the name? Objective. Why did I begin that with a Q? It's not objective, it's very subjective. So this one, you can also go into the dates. But these are lesser psychology journals. Or, let's just do all. No, because we're going back to that atavistic era. I love that word, atavism. I learned it from a comic book. Dr. Doom was telling it to somebody as he was giving them the smackdown. Black or African or that word. And on this one, we will have to put in psychology. It doesn't narrow down by that particular topic. We want the date range. Oh, here we go. 1958 and year 19. So this one might be a better gold mine. Let's say I want it to be in the abstract. Can we do abstract in this one, or does it have to be the title? It doesn't have the abstract. Okay, I'll just do an open search. And if there's too many, then we could narrow down by a declared. Oh, there's 22. Memorandum, identity, personality. There's something about James Baldwin. Identity is a lot. Expression, personality tests. So you get the idea. How objective, how subjective is it? I think this is maybe this lack of evidence is evidence for what you were talking about. The last one I want to show you is Web of Science. Web of Science is going back to the JSTOR model. It's just the greatest of the great. Unlike Scopus, Web of Science goes back, for some of the journals, into the 1800s. So this one we might look at schizophrenia. But I think the question that I have is, can you find a name of somebody cited, and then would you go in after that? This might be the place where you do that. So let's have that be in. Are we going to get an abstract for this one? There we go. Abstract. Add row. And let's try schizophrenia. And I want to show you something else to consider. Instead of putting a date range in here, I have you know what? I saw this term. Did I spell that correctly? Schizoid. I saw that term when I looked up something else. When we're looking at a specific population, these are high-end journals going way back. We maybe can experiment here, but without putting a date range in, let's see. So out of these 686, from here, we can look at the precedents for dates. Oh, I guess it doesn't go back that far. I wanted it to go back to earlier. Well, heck. What's the oldest ones? Date oldest first. I thought this went back into the 60s. It only goes back to 1991. Well, shut my mouth. Okay, ignore Web of Science. But if you can find in another journal, communication journal, or a mention of the doctors who are part of this, it might be such a strong but very small minority of psychologists that were talking about this, we might be able to narrow it down that way as well. But this is how I started, and I didn't find a lot, so let me know how it goes.